History is often taught as dates and crowns, treaties and triumphs. But beneath the gold and ceremony lies another history, one whispered, distorted, and sometimes deliberately buried. It is the history of power failing and what happens to those who once stood at the very top when protection, loyalty, and mercy vanish. Tonight, we begin with kings who learned too late that a crown does not make a man untouchable. Their deaths were not swift nor dignified. They were slow, humiliating, and remembered precisely because they violated the unspoken rule of royalty, that kings should die like kings. This is not legend, this is not myth, this is the part of history no one was meant to see. The Iron Inferno in September of 1327, England no longer had a king, at least not in practice. The crown had been stripped away, not by foreign invasion, but by betrayal from within the royal household itself. Edward II had ruled for 2 decades, though ruled may be too generous a word. His reign was marked by military failures, bitter conflicts with the nobility, and an inability or refusal to play the political game demanded of medieval monarchs. Powerful men resented him, the people distrusted him, and ultimately even his wife turned against him. Queen Isabella of France, once a diplomatic asset, became his greatest threat. Alongside her ally and lover Roger Mortimer, she engineered a coup so clean that it barely resembled one. Edward was forced to abdicate in favor of his young son. Officially, the former king was alive. Unofficially, his fate was already sealed. Edward was taken to Berkeley Castle, a grim stone fortress in Gloucestershire. It was remote, cold, and ideal for forgetting inconvenient prisoners. The goal was simple: ensure the former king did not return without creating a martyr. At first, the approach was subtle. Chroniclers described deliberate neglect, poor conditions, isolation, and confinement meant to weaken him physically and mentally. Some accounts suggest he was placed in a chamber where waste flowed nearby, the intent being to cause illness that could be blamed on natural causes. Whether exaggerated or not, the message was clear. Edward's life no longer mattered, but he did not die, and that was the problem. On the night of September 21st, 1327, events took a darker turn. The castle's lord conveniently left his post, leaving Edward in the custody of 2 men, Thomas Gurney and John Maltravers. What followed is one of the most infamous episodes in English royal history. The details come from later chroniclers, pieced together from testimony, rumor, and the memory of screams that echoed through the castle walls. According to these accounts, Edward was restrained and killed in a manner designed to leave no visible wounds, an act meant to conceal murder beneath the appearance of sudden illness. Whether every detail is true remains debated by historians. What is not debated is this: Edward II died that night, alone, deposed, and utterly powerless. His body was displayed publicly afterward, carefully examined to show no signs of violence. The official story claimed a natural death. Few believed it. For centuries, the manner of Edward's death was spoken of in hushed tones, not because it was proven beyond doubt, but because it symbolized something far more disturbing. A king could be erased quietly and efficiently once he became inconvenient. The crown had not protected him. It had marked him. The exploding corpse more than 2 centuries earlier, another king met an end that stripped away the illusion of royal invincibility, though in a very different way. William the Conqueror was not a weak ruler. He was not despised by his nobles. He was not deposed. He was one of the most feared and formidable figures of medieval Europe, a man who had taken England by force and ruled it with iron authority. Yet even William could not conquer his own body. In 1087, while leading a campaign in Normandy, the aging king suffered a catastrophic injury, not from an enemy's blade, but from a riding accident. His horse reared suddenly, and the rigid structure of the saddle struck him with devastating force. The injury did not kill him immediately. Instead, William was carried to a nearby priory in Rouen, where medieval physicians quickly realized there was nothing they could do. Internal injuries of this kind were a slow sentence. Infection set in. Fever followed. The king who had reshaped England lay immobilized, enduring weeks of decline. William knew he was dying. In his final days, he attempted to put his affairs in order, distributing lands, offering penance, and making peace where he could. But time was not kind, and neither was biology. He died on September 9, 1087. The ordeal, however, was not over. Royal funerals were meant to reinforce power even in death. William's body was transported to Caen for burial at St. Stephen's Abbey. But the journey took time, and the late summer heat did what heat always does. By the time the funeral began, decomposition had advanced significantly. The stone sarcophagus prepared for the king proved too small for his body. When attendants attempted to force the remains into place, the result was catastrophic. Contemporary accounts describe panic, overwhelming odor, and chaos within the church. The ceremony was rushed to completion as monks fled, their reverence defeated by reality. It was not an execution, it was not a conspiracy. But it was still a humiliation. The man who had bent kingdoms to his will could not even be buried with dignity. In death, William the Conqueror reminded Europe of a truth no ruler could escape: power ends and the body does not care who you were. The hidden privy murder of Edward II's death showed how quietly a king could be eliminated. The assassination of James I of Scotland demonstrated how violently royal authority could collapse when hatred reached its limit. James I was not a passive ruler. He was intelligent, educated, and deeply committed to strengthening the Scottish crown. He was also ruthless. His reforms curtailed the power of the nobility, created enemies, and ensured that resentment followed him wherever he went. By February of 1437, that resentment had matured into conspiracy. James was staying at a Dominican friary in Perth, believing it to be secure. That belief would cost him his life. Late in the evening, the sound of armed men moving through the building shattered the calm. James understood immediately what was happening. This was no riot, this was an assassination. With exits blocked and attackers closing in, the king made a desperate decision. He pried up the floorboards of his chamber and lowered himself into a narrow space beneath, unaware that it led to a sealed drainage channel connected to the monastery's privy. It was a fatal mistake. The space was too tight. Escape was impossible. And when James attempted to move, the noise betrayed him. The assassins followed the sound and found their king trapped, defenseless, and utterly exposed. What followed was swift and brutal. James fought as best he could, but the confined space offered no advantage. The attack was over within minutes. When it was finished, the King of Scotland lay dead in a place meant for waste, a grim metaphor that chroniclers would not forget. The crown passed on, the conspirators were hunted down, but the message lingered. Royal blood did not guarantee a royal end. The emperor's golden curse in the year 260 AD, the Roman Empire suffered an embarrassment unlike any before or since. Valerian marched east to confront the rising power of the Persian Empire. Rome had faced many enemies, but this campaign ended in disaster. Valerian was defeated and captured alive. No Roman emperor had ever been taken prisoner by a foreign power. For the Persian king Shapur-I, this was an opportunity not merely to win a war, but to shatter Rome's image of invincibility. Roman sources describe a period of prolonged humiliation, intended to reduce a living symbol of empire into an object lesson. Accounts of Valerian's death vary widely. Some come from hostile writers, eager to portray divine punishment or barbarian cruelty. One of the most infamous stories claims that the emperor was killed in a grotesque public execution involving molten metal. Modern historians treat these accounts with caution. What is far more likely is that Valerian died in captivity, degraded, powerless, and forgotten by the empire he once ruled. Even so, his fate was unprecedented. Rome had always believed its emperors stood above such indignities. Valerian's capture proved otherwise. The empire survived, but the illusion was broken. For the first time, the world saw a Roman emperor not as a god, but as a prisoner. These deaths were not accidents of fate. They were moments when power failed, protection vanished, and the truth of authority was exposed. A king could be murdered in silence. A conqueror could be humiliated by his own mortality. An emperor could be dragged from his throne and erased, and this is only the beginning. In Part 2, we will descend even deeper, into bodies undone by bloodlines, rulers consumed by disease, and executions designed not just to kill, but to make examples. The crown may glitter, but it has always been heavy with blood. Power does not always end in betrayal or steel. Sometimes it rots from within, not with rebellion, not with assassins, But slowly, relentlessly, through bloodlines poisoned by ambition, bodies collapsing under disease, and rulers forced to endure the consequences of choices made generations before they were born. If Part 1 revealed how kings could be destroyed by others, Part 2 reveals something far more unsettling: how some rulers were destroyed by themselves, by their dynasties, or by the very systems that elevated them. The Inbred King's living autopsy on November 1st, 1700, the royal palace in Madrid fell unnaturally silent. Servants whispered, courtiers waited, bells stood ready. Charles II of Spain, last of the Spanish Habsburgs, was dying. He was only 38 years old. In truth, Charles II had been dying his entire life. He was the product of a dynasty obsessed with purity, one that believed royal blood must never be diluted, even if it meant folding a family tree inward until it collapsed under its own weight. His parents were uncle and niece. His grandparents were bound by similar unions. Generation after generation, the Habsburgs chose power over biology. Charles paid the price. From birth, it was clear something was wrong. He was slow to develop, slow to speak, slow to walk. His jaw, so pronounced it became a symbol of the Habsburg line, prevented him from chewing properly. His tongue was oversized, his body fragile, his immune system weak. He drooled constantly. He suffered chronic infections, his limbs trembled. He endured seizures that physicians of the time could not explain, attributing them instead to witchcraft or demonic interference. And yet he was crowned king of one of the most powerful empires on earth. Throughout his life, Charles was examined, documented, and studied by court physicians who could do nothing but observe. Their notes read less like medical reports and more like anatomical curiosities. He was described as incapable of producing heirs, incapable of sustained physical activity, incapable, some whispered, of fully understanding the world around him. Still, the crown remained on his head. As Charles aged, his condition worsened. By his 30s, he could barely walk unassisted. His body seemed to be failing organ by organ. In October 1700, he collapsed entirely. For 3 days, the court waited. When he finally died, the doctors performed an autopsy, one of the most disturbing ever recorded for a European monarch. They found abnormalities so severe that even by modern standards they are shocking. Organs malformed, systems underdeveloped, signs of profound neurological impairment. The physicians concluded, without irony, that Charles must have been under a curse. They could not otherwise explain how a man so biologically compromised had lived nearly 4 decades, but the truth was simpler and far more damning. Charles II was not cursed by magic, he was cursed by dynasty. With his death, the Spanish Habsburg line ended. Europe would soon descend into the War of the Spanish Succession, fought not over a man, but over the vacuum left by a bloodline that had finally consumed itself. The king was gone, the damage remained. The rotten king more than 17 centuries earlier, another ruler faced death not as a single moment, but as a prolonged collapse so horrific that contemporaries believed it could only be divine punishment. Herod the Great ruled Judea for over 30 years. He was brilliant, ruthless, and paranoid. He built monuments, including the expansion of the Second Temple, and ruled through fear, execution, and suspicion. By the final year of his life, that fear turned inward. Ancient historian Josephus describes an illness that unfolded in stages, each more agonizing than the last. It began with relentless itching, spreading across Herod's body with no relief. Then came swelling in the limbs, severe enough to distort his legs and feet. Soon after, infection set in. What followed was a breakdown so severe that even ancient observers recoiled. Herod's condition worsened daily. His breathing became labored. Convulsions racked his body. Pain robbed him of sleep and sanity. The stench surrounding him became unbearable. Servants struggled to remain in the room. Treatments failed. Baths, oils, potions, none slowed the progression. His body was, quite literally, decaying while he was still alive. As his strength failed, Herod's mind did not soften. In a final act of cruelty, he ordered the execution of his own son, ensuring that grief, not celebration, would greet his death. He even attempted suicide, grasping for a blade, only to be stopped by those who feared the consequences of letting him die on his own terms. When death finally came in 4 BC, it was not swift, it was not merciful. Josephus wrote that those who witnessed Herod's final days believed the gods themselves were dismantling him, piece by piece, for the violence he had inflicted on others. Whether divine or biological, the message was clear. The king who ruled through terror was undone by his own flesh. The tortured Maratha king, some deaths are meant to end a life, others are designed to erase a legacy. On March 11, 1689, the Mughal Empire staged one such death. Sambhaji, son of the legendary Shivaji, had ruled the Maratha kingdom under constant pressure. For nearly a decade, he resisted Mughal expansion, humiliating imperial armies and refusing submission. For Emperor Aurangzeb, Sambhaji was not merely an enemy, he was an insult. When Sambhaji was finally captured, execution alone was not enough. Aurangzeb wanted a spectacle, one that would break resistance through fear. The Maratha king was paraded publicly, stripped of dignity, mocked before the very people he had once led. But humiliation was only the beginning. Over days and weeks, Sambhaji was subjected to systematic brutality intended not to kill him quickly, but to destroy him visibly. Chroniclers describe a process of punishment carried out in stages, with care taken to keep him alive between each ordeal. Witnesses reported that Sambhaji refused to submit. He refused conversion. He refused to beg. Even as his body failed, his defiance remained intact. When death finally came, it was delivered publicly. His remains were displayed as a warning, a message to every rebel who dared challenge imperial authority. But the effect was not what Aurangzeb intended. Instead of extinguishing resistance, Sambhaji's death hardened it. He became a martyr, a symbol, proof that even the most powerful empire could only win through cruelty. The Marathas did not disappear, they endured. The pattern beneath the blood across centuries, continents, and cultures, these deaths share something deeper than brutality. They reveal the same truth. Power isolates, power distorts judgment, power creates enemies, sometimes within, sometimes inherited, sometimes unavoidable. Some kings were destroyed by betrayal, some by biology, some by vengeance disguised as justice, but none were spared. The crown did not save Edward II in his cell. It did not preserve William the Conqueror's dignity in death. It did not protect James I from conspirators. It did not rescue Valerian from captivity. It did not spare Charles II from genetic collapse. It did not ease Herod's suffering. It did not grant Sambhaji mercy. History remembers their power, but it never forgets their ends, because in the final moments, when the guards step away, when the body fails, when the dynasty collapses, there are no kings, only men, and death has never cared who ruled the world. Every empire tells itself the same lie, that it is different, that it has learned from the past, that its rulers are stronger, smarter, chosen, protected by fate, faith, or destiny. History answers that lie with repetition, because the longer power lasts, the more violently it ends. In this final descent, we move beyond assassination and illness, beyond betrayal and bloodlines. Here, death becomes a performance, a warning. A deliberate act meant not just to end a life, but to dominate memory itself. The king who was eaten alive by his own court in the year 1566, Russia trembled, not from foreign invasion, but from the will of one man. Ivan the Terrible had transformed Muscovy into a centralized state through fear. He ruled by purges, executions, and paranoia so extreme that even loyalty was considered suspicious. But Ivan's cruelty did not protect him, it consumed him. By the final years of his reign, the Tsar was physically broken. His body was swollen, his joints inflamed, his skin ulcerated. Chronic pain kept him awake for nights at a time. His temper, already unstable, became uncontrollable. He trusted no one, not his advisors, not his guards, not even his own sons. In a fit of rage, Ivan struck his heir, Ivan Ivanovich, with a staff, mortally wounding the very person meant to inherit the throne. The blow echoed far beyond the chamber. Russia watched in horror as its future collapsed under the Tsar's hand. After that moment, Ivan unraveled. He grew obsessed with death, religion, and betrayal. He demanded constant reassurances. He surrounded himself with priests and astrologers. He believed poison lurked in every cup, and in 1584 his fear may have been justified. Ivan collapsed suddenly while playing chess. He convulsed, he gasped, and then he was gone. Later examinations of his remains revealed unusually high levels of mercury, used at the time as medicine, but also as poison. Whether it was slow poisoning, medical malpractice, or paranoia manifesting into reality remains debated. What is certain is this: Ivan died isolated, despised, and terrified, consumed by the same fear he had inflicted on an entire nation. The man who ruled through terror could not escape it. The boy king whose blood was too valuable to spill in 1793, revolutionary France faced a problem. The monarchy was dead, but not entirely. Louis XVI was only 8 years old when his father, Louis XVI, was executed. By royalist law, that made the boy king. To the revolutionaries, he was not a child, he was a symbol, and symbols are dangerous. Rather than execute him publicly and risk martyrdom, the new regime chose something far more calculated. They erased him slowly. Louis XVI was imprisoned in the Temple Tower, separated from his family, isolated, and placed in the care of men whose job was not to raise him, but to break him. He was neglected deliberately. Cleanliness disappeared, nutrition vanished, human contact ceased, the boy deteriorated. Witnesses described a child who forgot how to speak properly, who became feral, withdrawn, and sickly. Disease spread unchecked, his body weakened, his mind faded. In June of 1795, the child died in captivity. No ceremony, no witnesses, no dignity. His death certificate listed illness, but France had not merely killed a boy. It had demonstrated a new kind of power, one that did not need spectacle or executioners' blades. It simply let a king disappear. The emperor who drowned in luxury power does not always kill through violence. Sometimes it smothers. Elagabalus ruled Rome briefly and disastrously. He was young, indulgent, and utterly detached from Roman expectations of leadership. He replaced governance with excess. Banquets lasted days. Wealth was wasted publicly. Religious traditions were mocked. The Senate was humiliated. Rome tolerated many vices in its emperors. Contempt was not one of them. As resentment grew, Elagabalus retreated further into indulgence, surrounding himself with loyal guards and ignoring reality. He believed his position made him untouchable. In 222 AD, his own Praetorian Guard proved him wrong. Dragged from his palace, the emperor was murdered alongside his mother. Their bodies were abused, desecrated, and finally thrown into the Tiber River, denied even burial. Rome had not simply removed a ruler, it had erased him. His name was struck from records, his memory condemned, his reign reduced to a warning of what happens when power forgets restraint. The crown that ate its wearer in England, one king would come to embody the danger of ambition more clearly than any other. Richard III seized the throne during the chaos of the Wars of the Roses. His reign was short, controversial, and built on suspicion. When Henry Tudor challenged him, Richard chose the battlefield. At Bosworth Field, he charged directly at his enemy, a desperate gamble to end the war in a single blow. It failed. Richard was surrounded, struck down, and killed in combat, the last English king to die in battle. His body was stripped, humiliated, and displayed publicly to prove he was truly dead. For centuries, his remains were lost beneath a parking lot, his grave unmarked, his legacy distorted by enemies and propaganda. The crown he seized became the reason he fell. The final truth of power across eras and civilizations: the pattern does not change. Power attracts violence. Power invites decay. Power isolates until even death becomes inevitable. Some rulers are murdered, some are erased, some rot slowly under the weight of their own excess. But all of them learn the same lesson too late. A crown is not armor, a throne is not safety, and history does not grant mercy. It only records the end, because when the guards turn away, when the body fails, when the people stop believing, there are no kings, only names, and death will always collect them. Every ruler believes their end will be different, that history will pause for them, that their power will soften the fall, that their name will outweigh their mortality. It never does. In this final chapter, we confront the last illusion of power, the belief that legacy can outlive consequence. The king who lost his head to the crowd in January of 1649, England crossed a line from which there would be no return. Charles I believed deeply in the divine right of kings. He ruled as if authority flowed directly from God to crown, bypassing parliament and people alike. For years, he pushed England toward civil war, convinced compromise was weakness. Eventually, the war ended, and Charles lost. What followed was unprecedented. A reigning monarch was placed on trial by his own subjects. The charge was treason not against the crown but against the nation. Charles refused to recognize the court, insisting no earthly power could judge a king. History disagreed. On a cold January morning, Charles was led to a scaffold outside the banqueting house in London. He spoke calmly, still convinced that posterity would vindicate him. Moments later, the executioner's blade fell. The crowd groaned not in celebration but in shock. For the first time in modern European history, a king had been publicly executed by his own people. The message was irreversible. A crown was no longer sacred. A king was no longer untouchable. The emperor who ruled the world and died alone more than a century later, another ruler learned that conquest does not guarantee loyalty. Napoleon Bonaparte rose from obscurity to dominate Europe. He crowned himself emperor, redrew borders, toppled dynasties, and bent nations to his will. For years, it seemed nothing could stop him, until everything did. Defeated and exiled, Napoleon was sent to the remote island of St. Helena, a windswept rock in the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from the empire he once commanded. There were no cheering crowds, no armies, no court, only guards, only isolation. Napoleon spent his final years dictating memoirs, replaying victories, and arguing with ghosts of former glory. His health declined, his body weakened, his world shrank to a few rooms and bitter memories. When he died in 1821, the man who had ruled millions left behind nothing but words and unanswered arguments about how he should be remembered. He conquered Europe. He could not conquer time. The lesson written in blood and silence, from ancient emperors to medieval kings, from divine rulers to revolutionary victims, from conquerors to children born into crowns, they all learned the same truth. Power does not protect you. Legacy does not spare you. History does not soften your end. Some died screaming, some died rotting, some died quietly forgotten, but none escaped, because crowns are worn by humans and humans break. Final words when the pageantry fades, when the guards step back, when the throne stands empty. There are no gods, no chosen ones, no immortals, only names carved into stone and stories told as warnings. If you made it to the end, you now know what history tried to hide. If you enjoyed this descent into the darkest corners of power, subscribe for more untold history. Comment below which ruler shocked you the most and which story you want covered next, because history doesn't just remember victories, it remembers how kings fall.